Alrighty, to make the best uses of time, want to thank you all for joining this panel this evening. In the meantime, let me share the results with everybody. Alrighty, so as noted, many of you heard about the event from Autumn itself. A lot of you miss eating and grabbing drinks with friends the most of pre-pandemic life, which I can speak to. I think anyone on this panel can speak to, and a lot of attendees. And how has Autumn impacted you? It seems like a good chunk of you, between networking opportunities, other reasons, and providing tech industry and diversity and inclusion info, this is a panel that will really bolster some of the output that you guys are looking for. So we're excited to join you all this evening. All righty. So getting into the crux of things, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you. Good evening. My name is George Eddie Yosten, and I'd like to welcome you to the Austin Urban Tech Movement panel discussion. I serve as community outreach coordinator for Autumn, and it is with great pleasure to both moderate this panel with our panelists and welcome you to this event. The topic that is at hand this evening is centralized around the empowerment of a diverse set of employees within the tech industry. When we sat down and chose this topic months ago, it seemed very topical, and now more than ever, recent events, the COVID crisis, it's even more topical. Many commentators have been asking whether employees are empowered in a virtual setting, and this topic, if anything, has been sharpened by the current crisis. To give insight as to who Autumn is and what Autumn does, the mission is to bridge the gap between Black, Brown, and Latinx communities and the tech industry through job placement, career development, and networking opportunities. Many of you have mentioned that those are the ways that Autumn has helped you, and it's great to see that mission being fulfilled. The vision, though, alongside the work, is to increase representation of people of color within Austin's tech industry while leading diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives throughout the city. We put together this panel of esteemed guests to allow them to, one, share what they know about the industry, two, answer the questions that you guys submitted and have provided this evening, and to have tools and talking points to lead this conversation and empower our audience, the people that they affect, and beyond. We only have an hour, so without further ado, I'd love to introduce everyone to the panel that we have. First, we have Jonathan Hawkins of Apple. Jonathan, feel free to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Hawkins, and like George said, I work with Apple in our operations department in a smaller team called Strategic Data Solutions, which is kind of like the data science fraud center for pretty much every line of business at Apple. I've been with Apple about 5 years, and I'm really happy to be here with you guys and share what I've learned over my last 5 years at Apple. I'm originally from Dallas also, by the way.
Solid, solid. Thank you, Jonathan. Next up, we have Fallon Blossom of Cloudflare. Fallon, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, hope y'all are doing all right. As you said, I'm Fallon Blossom. I work at Cloudflare and I'm a multimedia content designer on the product content experience team. What that means is I spend most of my time producing and directing product demo videos and writing technical documentation for all of Cloudflare's products. And when I'm not doing that, I'm one of the global leads of our ERG that's designed to support folks from the African diaspora and their allies called AfroFlare, hence the shirt.
Thank you, Fallon. Chris, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Butler. I work for Microsoft. The title of my role is a technical account manager, and I work in the services division. As a technical account manager in services, my role is to work with customers to help identify gaps and opportunities within their planning landscape for strategy or even tactically, to assign engineers accordingly or to diagnose myself and resolve. A little bit about me: I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised, love my hometown. And I am representing Austin BAM, or Blacks at Microsoft. We're relatively new as a chapter here, so we'll be growing. You'll be seeing more of us. Thanks for having me.
Indeed, indeed, and thanks for joining us. Now, without further ado, I'd like to get into questions. And this one started off a conversation we had virtually backstage, if you will. In the era of COVID-19, and I'd like to start with Jonathan, how can companies make sure that remote employees are not overwhelmed, feel a sense of community, which I hope we feel as a panel, and still feel connected to company leadership for career advancement? Let's start generally speaking here. And let me go ahead and make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah, that whole mute and unmute thing, I need to get that. So,
it happens.
I think that we've had a very long history of remote work, and like my team, I work 1 or 2 days a week remote as it is. And so we've had a long history and established teams that have already been in the at-home space. And so when the pandemic happened, we had some of those best practices in place to already transition some other teams into and kind of learn and bridge that gap, that learning gap for new employees going into the space. And so I think what companies need to make sure they need to continue to do is kind of treat work as business as usual. Mm-hmm. Like, we still need to get things done and we still have work to do, but still have the sensitivity that this is a new space for everyone, for the majority of our workforce, and encourage people to lean on those people who have been doing this for a while. So about a year ago, we introduced, and let's speak specifically to Black at Apple, which I am the co-chair of, one of the 2 co-chairs here in Austin. We introduced an at-home Black at Apple space. So for our communities, our Black at Apple communities, we've been leaning on a couple guys, David and Bernadette, to really kind of help guide we call them diversity network associations, which is similar to ERG, but help guide and set some guidelines to be successful in the space, because it is different for a lot of people. Also, we had some really strong established online tools in terms of keeping people connected with the wellness teams, because since we had remote people, we had to already meet digitally with some medical staff with things where you just don't have to be there and be diagnosed. Mm-hmm. So understanding like that technology piece that was already established, is boosting that, and just really putting education behind how to use those tools. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the last piece that was really important for us is our people team and our wellness teams, which are actually separate from our medical team. Already having some of those, like just been able to transition and like push the boundaries of what we can do in the space of the virtual space. So we do have daily workouts, we do have daily yoga, we do have daily like just wellness and like really understanding the wellness piece and pressing the wellness piece, because this is like this is the time to encourage you to find out more about the people you work with and the people you don't work with. And so encouraging people to come from every space to have that sense of community as if you still are on campus and not necessarily just walking around.
Indeed.
So managing that diversity or maintaining that diversity has been really important for us at Apple. So.
Indeed. And this was a question that was echoed enough through the submissions that our audience so graciously provided via Eventbrite that I want to ask each and every one of you. Fallon, your team and your ERG over at Cloudflare, is the approach similar to the one that Jonathan's team take? Is it different? Where is the intersection? Where do things vary?
So Cloudflare actually quickly organized and assembled a business continuity team that kind of handles making sure that people are focused on business as usual. The interesting thing about Cloudflare is what they did is they pulled folks from different aspects of the leadership, different departments in the company. So it's a nice reflection of everyone at the company. They have a chat room that anyone can join and talk to, ask questions, share resources. They have open office hours. They email us. They started off emailing us, I think, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. So the business continuity team handles that part. What Afroflare has been doing, we've been handling kind of the other stuff. ERG, the R is resource. So we kind of position ourselves as a resource to support employees, to empower them, and to kind of just give them a space to say or express whatever they need, especially this past week.
Indeed, indeed. And this past week in particular has been relatively tumultuous for those who represent themselves in the D&I community. Chris, I want to kick over the question to you, whether it be in light of recent events or events not so recent, what is your team over at Microsoft doing to help echo and empower?
So a lot of what Jonathan and Fallon mentioned, we've adopted, right? I think the advantage, I guess, we have, and almost a disadvantage of sorts, is that almost half of the company, or about a third of the company, works remotely anyway. And so when calling into headquarters and so forth, there is a lot of remote interaction. So I think the adjustment for us was not so much on business, because frankly, business has been booming, right? Around collaboration tools, around setting up remote, around data center migration and so forth. So there's no shortage of things to do, but our leadership has encouraged us to take more time for ourselves, take more time for our families, and I think there's an element of patience that they wanted to introduce in an element of calm. Because we're all new to this. We're all trying to figure it out. So breathe, take the time you need for yourself, intentionally block time off on your calendar, but also remember to while your head's down or axe to the grind and working, remember to stay curious and expand your mind. Remember to read, remember to meditate, right? Whatever it is that helps you to maintain some sort of a balance or and stay mindful. Those are the things that Microsoft has really been pushing. I would also say too that the leadership in each respective org, from the CEO down to the services organization, even down to the retail stores, they've all been very vocal about how they're approaching it, sharing their insights, and then inviting others, whether it be through Yammer or through our Teams platform, to share their ideas too. So there's a lot of collaboration, and some would even say over collaboration in some cases, but in this particular case, you'd rather have more than not enough.
Indeed, indeed. And Chris, you bring up a good point about mindfulness, retention, and leadership. All three elements of retention, right? All three things that leaders need to do and need to enforce in order to allow for customer and employee retention, right? Especially when it comes to the qualms of diversity and inclusion, the ones that Autumn upholds, the ones that any other organization that takes diversity and inclusion seriously take into consideration. Jonathan, I want to bounce back to you. Beyond hiring efforts, in your opinion, what is Apple, and Fallon and Chris, you'll get this question too, what is your company doing to retain talent, right? It's one thing to talk about it, and it's one thing to be about it. What else can other companies take from Apple's, for example, in order to retain diverse talent?
Constant reminder of, I think it should be a constant reminder of why did we come to Apple to begin with? I think there's a lot of tech companies, especially here in Austin, to get engaged and do really good work and interesting work, and especially in the technical fields that the three of us and probably a lot of our memberships are involved in. And one thing, when I get an opportunity to talk to members of our DNA, one of the important things I try to remind them about is we do a lot of culture and value hiring. Like, we get a ton of talent that can all do the same things, but we hire people. And I think, like, if you continue to remind people of why you're here to begin with, and continue to support them in the ways that aren't just necessarily financially, or you give them, some kind of perk, or you give them a discount, right? Like, if you instill, like, if you believed in the values and came to us to begin with, I think that's what's going to retain you going forward, but still also reinforcing those values. So, like, we're continuing to build. We've actually introduced the retail space for Black at Apple during COVID. So I've had meetings like every other week with our new Black at Apple retail people in New York, because they've never done this before. But they understand, and we understand, like, the importance of what they're doing is more important than them going back to the retail store and getting customers in there. It's more important for them to be engaged with the people in their district and District 21 to actually have a community and be a part of that community when they come back to work and while they're still at work right now. So,
Indeed. And Fallon, I want to bounce back to you and your team at Cloudflare in terms of doing the work behind retention, right? One of Autumn's stakeholdings, and one thing that Autumn propagates is the idea of communicating what it takes to really do the retention work. Your team, your ERG, your company, speak to me in those three terms. What is your company doing to retain talent?
So at the company level, I will just say that our head of recruitment is a Black man.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. We have diversity recruiting staff, and the diversity recruiting staff is in a constant, and the other ERGs, we have so many ERGs, Latin Flare, Desi Flare, Asian Flare, Proud Flare. There's a constant dialogue between recruitment and the ERGs about, hey, we need more diversity. Can you help us? And understanding and acknowledging, in certain cases, we are the expert. In certain cases, we aren't. And so let's lean on your expertise. Let's lean on your networks, if you're willing to share them, to kind of bring people in, keep people here. I think our ERG is a huge support. So once you're in the boat, so to speak, a huge part of our orientation is to show off all of our diversity and our resources, including all of our ERGs. My specific team, the documentation team, is one of the most, it's a very diverse team. If I'm thinking about there's only 3 of us. We used to be 4. We have 2 women. When we were 4, we had a Latino lead, and we have 1 white guy. So, it's visible on our team that diversity is important. And our head of people, whenever she speaks to the company, whenever she speaks about diversity, she's super clear and very explicit about how it's not just her job, it's not just the ERG's job, it's everybody's job. So I think just hearing that from the top down, our CEO today at our all hands meeting made a very heartfelt statement about his displeasure and how he was upset by all the things that are going on in the world. Mm-hmm. So at least at Cloudflare, they're doing the best that they can, and we can see it on all levels in different ways.
Indeed, indeed. And Chris, I want to echo the idea of all 3 levels at Microsoft, right? Same question goes to you in terms of how the elements of enforcing and looking to retain talent, how is that echoed across all 3 levels at Microsoft?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, it really starts with the leadership, even within all 3 levels. I think where we started this journey in terms of retaining diversity, that was an indirect outcome. But what the point was, is they started, about 5 years ago, wanted to change the culture. Mm-hmm. We had a new CEO in place, and he brought a different sort of spin. He wasn't as focused as much on the business as much as he was building the culture, because his saying is, and I think this has been said 1,000 times, but culture will eat strategy for breakfast, mm-hmm. right? So he wanted to introduce a spirit of open-mindedness, of unconscious bias, and there's actual training around that. So we know that it's a priority, and it's something that is reiterated down the line from top to bottom. He also introduced a attitude of vulnerability, of respect, right? And a culture of learning, which I think the culture of learning is really what has instilled in us at the team level, how it's instilled within us to ask the questions why, or ask the questions how, to gain perspective and to not be closed-minded. A lot of my team personally works in Seattle. And so I don't know if anyone's been to Seattle. In the background is Mount Rainier, so you might recognize that as a Seattle landmark. But Seattle is very much a not a very diverse city. Now it's grown in diversity a lot, but when you look at my team, a lot of them look like each other, right? And so there has been an outpouring of sympathy, of questions, and trying to understand perspective. And sometimes, it can be a bit challenging to be, maybe, I don't want to say that, not a token, but to answer questions for people. But I think at the same time, it's that challenge is important for all of us to be able to step up and provide education, because they're advocates, right? And people are really interested in helping and want to understand and learn more. So that helps to retain, right? That helps to keep people engaged, because we know that there's a sense of camaraderie and team there. And then within the ERG space, I think as Fallon and Jonathan mentioned, being an outlet and being a space for employees to come and share their thoughts, and being a safe space, providing opportunities for people to engage within their communities and utilize Microsoft resources. Those are some of the things that they do. I think the GIVE program is probably one of our most notable and proud achievements, in the sense that it is every year in October, we have a program whereby every employee takes time off and volunteers. And this is designated time. Of course, throughout the year, people volunteer and spend and donate into the causes that are important to them. But Microsoft matches that, right? Matches it dollar for dollar. During COVID time, they actually increased the contribution. And even during the time that we spend doing volunteer activities, Microsoft pays the organization that we volunteer with, gives them money directly for that, right? So it's a matter of speaking it, but also putting your money where your mouth is, and that's something that I think encourages a lot of people to stay. And the ERG is an outlet to, when people get a little frustrated, right, to come and share their thoughts and perspectives as well.
Indeed. Chris, I think it was wonderfully said when you said, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. And besides the fact that I want to put that on a poster on this wall behind me, I think that echoes a lot of the work that Autumn does in the space when it comes to approaching companies that frankly put the cart before the horse, if you will. And I'd love to talk about that. And it may be something your company has done. It may be elements that another company has indoctrinated and you've seen them make missteps. But my question to you, and I want to start with you, Chris, what are some common mistakes some companies make when supporting or implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives?
I think for a long time in the past, and I think this is changing for sure as I look across the landscape of technology companies, there's been a rush to assign KPIs to everything. And sometimes you can't put a performance indicator on everything. Sometimes you have to work on, assessing what is really going on firsthand. And now you said not putting the cart before the horse and rushing to judgment or rushing to action, but assessing what's going on. And then maybe backing down and assigning some KPIs. I think, sometimes there can be no perceived value for diversity. And so I think one of the things that I've seen groups within, specifically within Xbox that Microsoft do well, is they assign business objectives to their diversity numbers, right? So the ERG works with the BRG, or Business Resource Group, and they work together to figure out what are the demographics that are going to drive this particular outcome for us, right? And when doing that, it shows those who might have biases, they can't argue with the numbers, right? So I think there's an element of culture, obviously, that you need to think about. But when you think about the business and tying that also to the mission around what diversity will be, I think that's also a key element that some companies might overlook.
Indeed. Fallon, I want to approach you with the same question. When it comes to common mistakes that companies make, when it comes to putting the cart before the horse or valuing strategy over culture, give me insight.
Yep. So one-off events with no follow-up, not having a strategy, not collecting data or making data-based decisions when you can, top-down initiatives versus bottom-up initiatives that are co-constructed with the impacted communities in mind, and doing things with, or having like a vision or an idea or saying something publicly or having that brand, but then not really having any action or proof to back it up.
Indeed. Very well said. And Jonathan, I'd like to conclude this question with you.
I'm not on mute this time, right? All right, cool. So
Indeed. So,
I actually thought about this question a little bit, and I think it's easy to want to be diverse and not do it the right way in terms of not putting in the people in the right places to bring the diversity behind them. So I think Fallon did mention the pipeline. So when you do hire someone that is a person of color or a woman of color or a woman in general, like knowing that they're going to be the person that also looks for those right people to come behind them and be kind of that beacon of, I want to be like that person. So when you do come into a company and you see a Fallon that's leading a team, you want to come work for Fallon because, or you want to come work for her company because you know this company does a certain thing, but also making it not such a barrier to entry. Like not feeling as if I am a person of color, I can't work for this company, I can't work for this team. So having some kind of diversity and diversity initiatives in the recruiting spaces and within the teams, like we were looking for an executive sponsor, and I'll use this because I think Rohit is an amazing person, but we in Austin didn't have an executive high enough that could really represent the Black at Apple community and be an executive sponsor for it. So Rohit, who's actually an Indian guy, stepped in and took that space. And then as he's built his team out, his actual direct reports team, they didn't have as many women as he would like, so he's added more women to his team, and then have the diversity piece in terms of, you know, people of color. So he hired more people of color on his team and has been bringing them up, and he's helped us build our DNA as well. So putting the right people in the right places and not thinking like just anybody with the right credentials can be someone who's going to brilliant, because they just may be looking, managing up and not really looking behind them to pull people up. So, yeah.
Indeed. Now, all three of you hit this point as we head into audience submitted questions, but Jonathan, you hit it one most recently, and I guess most notably. And so as we get into audience related question, this one was submitted by Misha Yalavarthi. Thank you again for your question, Misha. Misha wonders about the lack of women of color and people of color getting opportunities for promotions and other leadership positions within companies, most notably maybe hers. How has your company addressed this gap? Actionable things, not just speaking at conferences or raising awareness for certain causes. Misha's curious about specific actions that any company can take to increase this lack of diversity in leadership positions.
I think honesty is probably one of the first things. Like admit that we don't have people of color in these roles, and tell people we don't, and we're going to do that. Right. And I think Fallon actually mentioned it, like say something, do something, like don't just say it, like have a plan, have a strategy behind. I know we've hired a couple of new people in the last like 4 or 5 months whose job is to go out and find people of color, women of color, and try to hire them and put them in the right spaces. I think I think we should also look and think about the candidate space as well, right? I'm a really honest person. So like, just because I'm a person of color doesn't mean I should get a role. There's a level of work that's involved to make myself not only a valuable candidate, but a person of color as well. So when they look at me and they're comparing me to the next person, like I already stand out. So there's a double part of that. So we have and taken the steps, and we're a huge company, right? Like there's a ton of places that we can actually place people and put them in and have roles. So we've been aware, we've heard the feedback, and we're definitely making some strides there, and by putting the right people in places in the right recruiting and strategy teams to actually make this a real thing. So
Indeed. And Chris, I'm going to go to you next with this question. In terms of how Microsoft is empowering people across the spectrum of, you know, what we consider diversity, whether it be sexual orientation, religion, creed, you know, racial makeup, et cetera. Chris, give me insight as to what Microsoft is doing to make sure that actionable things are being done to put people in positions of leadership.
Yeah, I think Jonathan made a lot of good points, right, in terms of the candidates that do come in. I think when you get to a certain level, especially within a leadership role, you're highly sought after, right? And so it becomes a poaching game at some point in time, right? So Microsoft has been promoting, has been has been sharing those promotions. Now, no, the number doesn't move very much, right? I think what's happening now is Microsoft is kind of planting the seeds, putting people in that will create a pipeline to bring other people in and to enable them for promotion too, right? But I think we're obviously hiring a lot and putting people into leadership positions in very notable spaces. I think part of this too is, as much as I want to say the companies are responsible, I think there's a level set that needs to be on the candidates end or on the employees end, right? And learning how we need to better prepare for that. And I think that's one thing that leadership has also been focused on doing too, especially within the ERG space, is providing sponsorships, looking at mentorships to get people coached up and get them promoted into the next level, but knowing that it's not something that is going to happen overnight. So it's an investment of time, an investment of resources. But I think, I'm proud of what Microsoft has done. I think we have a long way to go, don't get me wrong. But I am proud of the momentum that we built, especially over like the past couple of years, right? But it also takes time for those numbers to kind of flush out, to really see what the real outcome and benefit is across the organization in terms of leadership.
Indeed, indeed. And Fallon, I want to conclude with you, whether it be top of funnel, whether it be promotions, tell me a little bit about what Cloudflare is doing to set an example in the industry.
Sure. So I think I talked a little bit about the top of funnel as far as like the head of recruiting and diversity stuff. So I'll focus on the promotion piece. A big tenet of Cloudflare's culture is transparency. They try to be as transparent and clear as often as possible. And as a documentarian, they wrote down the different capabilities that it takes to be an exemplary Cloudflare employee. It's something that is open and available to everybody that works here. And it just makes it very simple, straightforward, a certain set of characteristics and capabilities with descriptions and examples showing, hey, if you hit these, then there should be no reason that you're not promoted. Now, documentation is step one. The execution and the interpretation of that documentation is a whole nother thing. And I think that the second piece is rooted in the culture, right? If you have the type of culture where, people say what they mean, they're clear in their communication, they assume good intentions, they lead with empathy. If everything works, it works. However, I know that's not always the case. But at least, Cloudflare has attempted to create a system and a framework around this that, if executed properly, succeeds.
Indeed. And that leads me
to, I'm sorry, I don't want to derail, but I do think also, we're at a point now, especially after COVID, where employees and diverse employees in particular are very empowered to kind of create and write our own story and write our own narrative. If we feel like we're in a place where we're not appreciated, I'm certain that there will be, several other organizations looking for someone with our same talent and skill set. So I just say that for people who feel like they might be locked into something. You aren't. I mean, take the time, do your due diligence. Don't jump off the ledge unless you really feel like that's necessary. But at the same time, if you feel like you're getting passed up for opportunities and so forth, there are other companies out there that are looking. And I know a lot of tech companies are hiring now, just given them we're in this new space. So that's all.
Indeed, indeed. And this leads me to my next question and the next point that we're looking to make. And one of Autumn's cornerstones is making sure that companies are in a position to retain and, properly train diverse pools of talent. But Chris, you made a stellar point about jumping off, right? There comes a certain point in anyone's career where they may feel like they just genuinely aren't breaking any ceilings. They're not making the groundwork necessary to find themselves in the position that they're so due. People talk. How can companies who have lost diverse employees in the past regain that trust and talent pool that they may have lost? This question comes from Sarah Beth Noble. I would like to start with you, Chris, on this question.
Sure. It's a very interesting question, and especially when you think about regaining the trust of employees once you've lost a significant amount of diverse employees, and especially if it's a reason behind that, right? If it's a cultural reason or something like that, I think that's ultimately where it starts. Where I've seen companies be successful, and maybe even more particular teams within in Microsoft be successful, is they've developed steer codes, right? They've developed a diverse perspective on how we can actually drive to gain trust of diverse employees again. And it doesn't have to look like, not everyone on that panel, that steer code has to be diverse, but it has to be people who are driven toward the mission and understand the importance of the diversity as it relates to not only the company, but also to the business case, right? And to their customers. I think it's also important for any statistics or any progress that is made to be published and shared, right? Share it internally, but also share it externally. Wear it on your sleeve. If you're going to put the effort in, then be okay with sharing that progress that you've made or haven't made, and then admit what you can do to resolve that. Create advocates throughout, right? Whether you have team leads, diversity leads, and so forth. I think all of those things are really helpful to have someone who can be a authority or a source of truth, or someone that people can talk to if they need help with, you know, particular issues around trying to regain the trust of employees. Share your marketing efforts, of course, right, around diversity. I think it's very important to create some sort of obviously you want to perpetuate the image in which you're trying to pull people in. So make sure that your marketing efforts are also focused around diversity. And I guess lastly would be connect within the community. I think you gain people's trust by talking to the things that are important to them, that are close to them. And what's more close to you than the place you live, right? Or the place where your family's from. So I think companies can do a good job or can do a better job of reaching out and being involved in the communities in which people live, and showing that there's some compassion and empathy around the piece of losing those diverse employees, and how you really want to gain the trust of current employees and future employees to really strengthen that case. So
Indeed, well said. And Fallon, a question I want to approach with you, Chris brought up the idea of advocacy, right? Chris brought up the idea of maybe even privileged members of a company serving as advocates for those who may not have as large a voice for whatever reason. In terms of putting people who are privileged in that position, what kind of training or education opportunities do you think companies can provide to make all employees more focused on inclusion?
Yeah, I feel like I'm sitting here like really touting the Cloudflare party line, but we do an all company inclusion and bias training. It's something that happens fairly regularly, and it's a lot easier to do now that we're all at home. So they even do it multiple times a week. We have a diversity and inclusion learning partner who sits on the people team and reports directly to the head of people. And so if and when I ever need an ally, he's my first call. And, you know, AfroFlare has 2 executive advocates. We are not yet at the point where we have advocates at the like C-suite level that are of color. So we have 2 who are not, and they have been really good sources and resources and advocates for us. So that's kind of usually, you know, that's how we approach it. We try to inform, we try to educate. I know at AfroFlare, the way that we approach a lot of our programming, there's an educational component. Like by training, I'm an instructional designer and I create learning experiences. And so I take that same approach when I work with my leads to create programming. A few weeks ago, we grabbed a curly hair care texture specialist here in Austin, and we had an event for an hour where all we did was just talk about how to take care of our hair. And those types of things. So for me, I'm like, phone a friend, call anybody, call everybody. If they look like you, if they don't look like you, because Cloudflare is not at the point where we have the numbers. So build relationships, build strategic partnerships, and lean on them when you're struggling, because, you know, more people than not will show up for you. I know for me, it's hard to ask for help and admit when I'm struggling, but whenever I actually do it, I always get what I need. So asking for what you need is also a really good option to do.
Indeed. Jonathan, the same question pointed your way in terms of training and education opportunities that you think your company maybe has provided in the past and can serve for an example for anybody who is in the audience who is looking to implement the same best practices within their diversity and inclusion efforts. What kind of trainings or education opportunities do you think any company can provide to make all employees focused around the idea of inclusion?
Excuse me. I guess similar to what Fallon said, I guess ours isn't as frequent, but we definitely have like an unconscious bias training, and we have on our manager or supervisor level and above training as to like what does diversity look like, how can we be better as a company to like have diverse talent to be working on our teams. I think what's important too is we've done a really good job of collaboration. I know that word has come up a couple times. And I was at a conference, a Black Men Excel conference in Miami, and we had one of our higher ups who's a guy who he's a director, and I'm trying not to use names today, you know what I'm saying? I'm trying. And he sat down with all of us and he asked like, what do you want us to talk about? And we were talking about how are we going to help our communities, our Black and Apple communities at Apple, and to advance and to let people understand the importance of diversity. And, you know, the topic of having allies that don't look like us as allies, right? I think the only person that's not diverse to me is the person I see in the mirror in the morning. So like everybody else is what diversity looks like. And if more people understand that, like if they don't look like you, if they don't speak like you, if they don't have the same background, like that's only going to make everybody better, because as you're moving forward, you're all going to be bringing so many different things to the table. If I can help someone who's a part of our prior community, that only helps my community. And if a leader knows that he can bring on someone who's from Pride and can bring on someone he's a good teammate and he knows how well someone works in the Black community or the amigos at Apple community, like you just understand what that diverse network looks like. And so you're always going to be pinging on these different people to bring in the different types. And so like just the awareness that leadership needs to have, and what we've been trying to do is like bring that leadership piece of understanding what diversity looks like. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to hire a Black person or a Hispanic person. You need to hire somebody different than you, right? Like you don't need to see the same thing you see in the mirror every day. And like understand that person also brings some value to your team. So.
Indeed. And I want to take a moment, and thank you so much for your answer, Jonathan. I want to take a moment to remind our attendees that they can submit questions via our Q&A tool. We're trying our best to incorporate them within the audience-related questions that we have had submitted over Eventbrite. But if any questions pop up, please feel free to treat this more as a conversation than a presentation. Moving forward, I want each and every member of this panel to put on their thinking cap, because we're going to be thinking a little bit smaller and bigger. So getting into thank you for playing along, Fallon, and we'll start with you as a result. Fallon, how can startups serve diverse employees when they might be too small for ERGs or specialized support systems?
Well, it is our belief over here at Cloudflare that all it takes is one person to start an ERG. And I think that in those companies, fingers and toes crossed that they have some type of people team or HR department. If I was that individual, that would probably be my first stop. So, you know, I would go to them and explain like, hey, you know, I have this idea, I have this passion, there's this part of my identity that I would like to explore at work. Can we make space for that? Because ERGs don't necessarily have to spend money. It's better when they have a budget, so they can. But, you know, all it really takes is an idea and the passion. And I'll go back to my previous statement, just asking for what you want. My grandma always told me a closed mouth don't get fed. So if you're hungry, ask for some food. And you may or may, you know, if the company is small, it might not work, but try and keep trying. You know, as it grows, maybe things will change. Being hopeful and persistent would be my advice.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. Chris, the same question goes to you, whether it be best practices you learned at Microsoft that you could see being scalable at a startup. These questions come courtesy of Cindy Lopez and Maria Speckman, members of our audience. Are there any specific programming events, resources, or culture initiatives you would recommend to a company of that size?
Yeah, actually, there's one very recently that's being tested within my services, my group, the services organization, and it's a shared work sort of concept. But let me give some context to that. I think a lot of times when we're looking for promotion, when we're looking for opportunity, when we're looking for community, you know, a lot of times we're facing biases and things like that, right? And unconscious biases at that. But nonetheless, they're still pretty tough to overcome. What the shared work program that I mentioned has done actually gives employees an opportunity to trial within someone else's team, right? So there's a business value to maybe trying a new role, but also disproving those biases. And at the end of that trial period, that person is either hired onto the team, or they go back with the experience and so forth that they were able to gain and share, right? So I think why that's important in a startup is if you're already strapped for resources and strapped for time and so forth, if you're able to work on another team on a trial basis, you can start to spread the culture of diversity sort of indirectly, right? And lower the biases that that other people might have toward hiring other people of color or women or whatever, the designation might be, veterans or, disabled or otherwise, right? But I think that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people gravitate toward, and I'm interested to see the results, but I think the intent is there, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Indeed, indeed. And Jonathan, your work with Apple, your ERG's work at Apple, in terms of scalable initiatives you see, I want to get some insight from you too. What kind of specific programming events, resources have worked for your ERG and your team at Apple?
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess you guys can imagine we're really big, but we treat a lot of different markets and stores and we're worldwide. So like not everyone has a big presence of a large group of Black people who want to get together. So all these different places are kind of like startups for us. And so we did, before we opened the Market Center 21 for the retail store, we did a trial and we tested it out to make sure we could garner the right amount of interest, that way it could be successful. We had a lot of meetings with other teams. And I think similar to what Chris just said, like that experience gives you exposure. So you know that if you were working with someone else of color or a woman or a different kind of background than your own, that you would want to work with them more. And so you may pull somebody, like everyone that's a part of our Black at Apple membership isn't Black, right? Like you don't have to be Black to be a member. So for you to just get the exposure to work with somebody, you're gonna be like, hey, I want to start something with this guy. And it could be an ERG. Like you can have 2 Black guys, a white guy, Hispanic guy start the Black at Apple ERG, or Black at, whatever company it may be. So just that exposure, it's always, I'm a big fan of data. Apple's a big fan of data. Like that exposure, that the numbers, it has to make sense too, because you want to set people up for success. You don't want to start something, don't have the following or the backing, and then they're less encouraged to do something else. And it may be a business impact as well. So they may be less successful if it really doesn't translate. So encouraging them, but also still give them that support to know that we're willing to try anything out. As long as if you don't say nothing, like Fallon said, if you don't ask, like start there and then like test it out, test the waters, put the data behind it, get the advocates and keep rolling. Because at the end of the day, it's always gonna grow. Like if you're a startup and you plan on doing things, it's just gonna get bigger. So just sparking that little fire is always good.
Indeed. And one of the recurring things and one of the recurrent topics that you brought up, as we have about 5 minutes left here, one of the final questions I want to ask to each of you to give quick thoughts about, how are you maintaining engagement with members of your respective ERGs, with various minority communities, various diversity groups and inclusion groups at your companies? How are you guys maintaining engagement with the members beyond the obvious? Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Well, we had a membership meeting today for Black at Apple. We've been partnering. We did an event for lupus, and we partnered with a different community on campus. We have Heritage Month, so next month is going to be Heritage Month for Pride. So we're going to partner with Pride. I mean, we've treated it as if we haven't left campus as much as possible, knowing that our membership needs it. I mean, we need it. I think everyone just needs a sense of normalcy in light of what we're going through right now. And it's only like this too shall pass, hopefully, so just reminding members that we're still here and like it's still exciting and not everything is work related. So.
Indeed. Fallon, the same question to you.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. So that hair care event that I talked about before, we did that in conjunction with Latin Flair for our Latinx employees. We have general meetings. So Cloudflare is a global company too. So I have to be concerned about what's going on here in the US and what's going on abroad. So when we do have general meetings, we have to make sure that they're good for the folks in the US. And then on Tuesday, we had one for the folks in London and EMEA, London, Munich, Lisbon, Singapore, over there. So outside of that, just kind of the events just to hang out, like our chat, like I said, has been very active this week, but in general is fairly active. Like when I heard about the versus battles happening, I was like, hey, have y'all heard about this? If y'all not doing nothing this weekend, hop on Instagram. The club quarantine, when D-Night started DJing, I was like, hey, chill out, go listen to some music, take a load off. So I think our leads and our members, we try to keep it light, but also keep it relevant. And I think moving into this next phase for us is going to be more so about continuing to partner. So I'm looking forward to partnering with Cloudflare next month for something. We're working on an event and trying to identify a mental health professional to create a processing and healing space just for us because we're struggling. And then really just trying to make sure that the Black folks and our allies at Cloudflare, understand our culture, respect our culture, honor our culture, but also have resources and people and give them opportunities to shine. So like the flyer for our curly hair care event was designed by one of our members. We want to give, our members an opportunity to show their stuff for Afroflare. Do your job, but do it for us too. Add it to your portfolio. So all of those things, we try to hit it at all levels and really just try to be a resource for everyone.
Stellar. And Chris, I want to get some insight for you before we conclude here in terms of communication and being in a position where you have actionable steps and actionable communication amongst members of your ERG and beyond. What steps are you taking with your team at Microsoft?
I mean, Jonathan and Fallon covered all the pieces pretty well, right? I think if there's anything right now, people are over-indexing on making themselves available, right? We all know that we're all going through something new, something different, and not everyone knows each other's individual struggles or challenges. But as a unit, as a BAM unit, Blacks at Microsoft unit, nationally, we're making ourselves available, right? And we're reaching out to other ERGs and being in that space also to kind of have those community conversations around what are the things that are tugging at you, right? And there's a lot of common themes there, right? Even locally, I think, we've done a lot around doing like the virtual happy hours. And I've come to realize that I can't drink at 3 in the afternoon. I can't, take too many drinks at 3 in the afternoon or I'll be asleep by 7. So,
right.
But that's, those are old man problems. So whatever. But, I think in terms of, how we're supporting each other is really just being transparent and being there. And I think that's all we really need from each other right now. I think there's also been a push around not so much professional development, but just making sure you nurture your network. Make sure you don't, become a hermit. Make sure that you give time for yourself and give time for others that are important to you. Take care of your friends and your family. And ultimately, we know this is going to end. Like Jonathan said, this too shall pass, right? But what do we want to be like on the other side of it? And try and maintain the cultural values that we've already communicated, we build, that we live by, and be the best people we can be and help others to do the same.
Indeed, indeed. Well, first, I'd like to extend a warm thank you to our panelists alongside our attendees. You guys have submitted absolutely stellar questions, and you guys have been very cooperative in the midst of what is, a worldwide crisis. We're all going through this together. And for each and every one of you attending this virtual session, we thank you here at Autumn. We hope you've been provided with the insight as to the current situation and the effect of the interrelation between diversity, inclusion, and technology. But just know that the work and the conversation does not stop here. Below are two initiatives that the Austin Urban Tech Movement is taking to mitigate some of the issues that we've discussed this evening. Texas Technology for All is a petition with and for Governor Abbott to include and be more diverse in the execution of technology efforts amongst low income and underrepresented communities here in Austin and Texas. I think last count, we were at 150 out of the 200 signatures that we'd like as a group. So make sure, attend that link. You'll get it in a follow-up email after, but if you want to knock it out before dinner here, that'd be absolutely stellar. Read through it, educate yourself. And the Autumn Needs Assessment Form, which is a form meant to gauge the needs of Austin area students and Texas students in what they need in terms of resources. So please fill that out as well. In the meantime, please follow Autumn on social, whether it be Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, MySpace, Black Planet, whatever you're using. Please make sure that you follow Autumn TX, because know, attendees, that this is just the beginning of this conversation. We're very excited to host other conversations very similar to this one. Jonathan, Chris, Fallon, I hope everyone at home gives them a warm virtual round of applause. I don't know, there's a button here that you can click to give them a round of applause. Thank you guys so much for attending the session. We look forward to continuing the conversation, and we look forward to hearing, seeing, and being with all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
See y'all later.